So I was giving them a perspective, historical, as to why county government turns out to be the way it is. And it's because of England, because we get our inheritance from England. And so as the new country is figuring out what kind of constitution and how it's going to govern itself, meanwhile, it's got settlers that are moving west into land that they haven't figured out what to do with either. And during those first 25 years, when they're developing this stuff, they're trying to deal with all of that. So in the Constitution, it outlines what the federal government will do. In the 10th Amendment, it gives the authority to the states on anything that the US government is not specifically saying it's going to do, and not anything that it specifically says to the states you can't do. So anything else gets picked up by the states.
Like abortion.
Well, yeah, they probably hadn't envisioned that being regulated at that point. But anyway, and how are the states going to do that? They're going to do it by creating units of local government to carry out their services. So in the meantime, this struggling new government is creating a process for what to do about all that land. And the first one, and again, this is before we have a ratified constitution, they set up a survey system, which eventually surveys almost all of the US, not the eastern stuff that's already developed, but much of the rest of the US is surveyed with this method, the baselines. That's how you get the surveyors, the township, square, which then evolves into town government and so on. That's another presentation that if you ever want to see, ask Ann, because that's on local government in general. And 2 years later, they passed the Northwest Ordinance, which is important particularly to us because it deals with land north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi, and becomes our state and Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And it says, it outlines the way that territories will be created and then states.
I don't know if this makes a difference, but did they address anything with the current the Indians?
Well, interesting that you ask. In the other one, I had a couple slides in there because that same question was in many of our minds, because it was an empty land, obviously. And there is a section in the very beginning of it that talks about the Indians and is a very idealistic and flowery statement about how fairly they will be treated. Didn't work out quite the way that it's there. And how, yeah, it's, and really, I mean, I tried to Google as many references as I could to the Indian population or the Native American population or the indigenous population in the Northwest Ordinance. And I only found 2 references. One was that kind of flowery, idealistic language, and then one that talked about a specific Indian uprising and how they needed to be dealt with or something. It was just a very specific to a certain area. Strange, though.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Like they like to pretend that they want.
Yeah, exactly.
Assuming.
Right. So chapter 59 of the Wisconsin statutes is where you find out how county government is set up and supposed to work, describes its duties, what authority it has, and how county boards, what their power is in terms of using them, sets up the structure, the legal duties, how they can raise revenues, and philosophically, it makes you realize that if that's what they set up, they ought to be very careful to have an orderly and effective system of state-local relations, which isn't always how it happens. Sometimes it is. They're interdependent. They decide. They authorize the use of the property tax. They authorize how it's levied, how it's collected, and what the limits are on it. And we have somebody else coming. I don't know if it's for us. Okay, so the county board has to deal with the legislative and executive functions, and that has evolved over time. The legislature says there has to be somebody in charge that they can contact. And in 1960, they created an elected position of county executive for Milwaukee. Scott Walker, who before he was governor, was a county executive for the city of Milwaukee. Then in 1969, they extended that right to the other counties, and there are other counties who have decided to have a county executive. That's an elected position, okay? Which is different than the other two. So the decision is, what does your county want? And I'll talk about that in a second. Right now, there are 12 counties that have chosen to have a county executive. They're mostly big counties.
But all of them have county boards. Just
They all
not-
have county
not-
boards,
okay.
yes. Okay, so in 85, 87, the position of county administrator is authorized. That's an appointed position. It is the one employee that is hired by the county board and is answerable to the county board. Not until 1987, right. There are 31 counties that have that. And then in the budget year, 85, 87, and then in 87, they also put this other position that was an alternative called an administrative coordinator. And the remaining 29 counties, there are 72 total, have an administrative coordinator. It could be anybody from the chairperson of the county board to somebody that's not related to the county board in any way. It could be full-time or part-time, and you'll see 8 of them are full-time and 21 are part-time, depending on the size of the county and how much work they have to do. So this is also hired by the county board or designated by the county board. And years ago, our county had to decide, this was, I want to say in the 80s, whether they wanted a county executive or a county administrator. And there was a lively debate, and I believe we had an advisory referendum. And even now, when a county administrator leaves, then the county board has to decide again. They can't decide, they have to decide, do they want the executive? Do they want the administrator? Do they want the administrative coordinator? Okay. And it just depends on what your preference is, but the thing to keep in mind is, if a county executive is elected, the county board can't get rid of them. Okay. And vice versa.
Right.
So the difference between these two are, the administrator can hire and fire all of the rest of the staff. They are in charge, okay? An administrative coordinator is more of a first among equals of the department heads. They call meetings, they kind of coordinate. They don't have any power over disciplinary or supervisory over the other department heads. So they're usually in smaller counties. All right, so we have 72 counties. Consider the fact that over half of them are less than 50,000. We are a very rural state.
Yeah.
Again, it's, there's the local face of state government, and they can do some things in their own right.
How many people in our county?
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's the same.
29,000, I think,
Well,
in that ballpark.
definitely.
So this is the county supervisory map. You get elected, one supervisor from the district.
And who determines the districts in a county?
The county board has a redistricting committee. In the last one in 2020, the census happens. They send the data goes into the federal government. They collect it in what are called census blocks. And you assume that means they're kind of square or kind of round, and they're not. They're like, just all these weird shapes. I don't know how they originally came up with them, but it will have a census block, and the one around Egg Harbor is a big, long, skinny one, and it will have the number of people in that block and whatever. So they send them back. There is now software. The state puts the census block data into all the software for all of the state, send it to the counties, and then your technical staff essentially operates that. However, there is a county board committee that supervises that and makes the decisions. And I was able to be chair of that in 2021. And what we found was, they started, okay, the rules are in the software, it has to be compact districts, contiguous districts, and approximately equal districts. So there can't be a 10% difference, 5% too big, 5% too small, kind of. All right, and that means, I think our number, our sweet spot was like 1,350 for each district at that point. And when you put the software in and it spits it out, you can't mess with it much. Because the minute you start to say, I don't like that, we've just pushed that supervisor right out of their district. If you try to put them back, it skews everything. So we pretty much,
Let it go.
we had to let it, I mean, that was our opinion, is we were gonna follow the 3 rules and it didn't matter. In my district, that was the year I had decided I wouldn't run again, and I decided it at the beginning of my term, luckily. So, as it turned out, had I wanted to run again, I would have had competition with another supervisor, because now we were both in the same district.
Your new district.
No, that was my
Oh,
new
it was your
district.
District,
So you
but
had
to
you're
live-
both in the same one.
we were both in the same one.
And you
And,
have to live in that district.
That's.
So his old
yeah, you have
district
to live,
needed somebody new.
well, no, because the districts weren't the same. Okay.
Who determines the size?
It's
The
a-
1,300.
It's
It's
based on
divided by
attendance.
21,
But who determines the 21?
the county board. There are guidelines for how big they can be and how small the numbers can be, but
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
and
that I
sometimes,
was-
yeah,
Wasn't
yeah,
sure. which-
good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
If I
my district, it was a very different shape before. It was, I guess I could show you. I'm not supposed to get too far away or my voice won't be on here. But my district was south and north of the canal and the town of Sturgeon Bay and a little bit of the town of Nassau. You can see the gold. That's what it is now.
Yeah.
So I lost that top part and it pushed my district into Ken Fisher's district, which had been further into the city. So Ken and I would have had to run. And I had announced long ago that I wasn't, and I wasn't interested in changing that decision. It was the right decision. There was another situation where in further west in Southern Door, the districts changed and 2 incumbents had to run against each other, and obviously one was defeated. So, it was what it was. People were not happy.
But it was fair. I
It
mean,
was
if you-
fair,
if
and
you
it,
have- If you have
Yeah.
criteria that you're gonna follow. and
Yeah.
you Give it to a computer.
especially in the
computer doesn't
times we
care
live
who you
in,
are.
it was important for us to follow that.
Yes.
So, anyway, so that's, and this is just a blow up of the city.
So there's 21 county supervisory districts. Is that just Door County? Or is that?
Yes, that's just Door County.
Okay. That I wanna
Right.
write down.
Everything you're seeing is just Door
Door
County.
Okay.
Okay, so what do counties do? They, again, are the arms and legs of the state, and they provide all of these services. You're gonna have a bunch of handouts, and there's gonna be a QR code at the end here where you can do what you do with QR codes, take the picture, you'll be able to get a PDF of this.
Okay, great.
So you don't have to take, and I also have handouts.
Oh, good.
Okay, so I don't have handout of the whole thing, but I have handout of certain parts of it. So the underlined pieces are elected officials. I'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, those are the kinds of services, birth, your death certificate, your birth certificate, marriage license. I don't want to take time to read all of these because it's going to be available to you. An additional 3 offices, county treasurer, clerk of circuit court, coroner, or if you don't have that, in Door County's case, we have a medical examiner, not a coroner. So we have 6 elected officials. These are called constitutional officials. They are elected for 4-year terms. They are left over. They're in the Constitution. They haven't been taken out. They've been in there for a long time, since the beginning. And it's kind of a leftover thing, but they do place obviously significant roles, and they run departments and provide services that the state needs them to provide. So one quick thing, they are partisan. So county clerk runs as a Republican or a Democrat or a Green or a whatever, Libertarian, even though it has nothing to do with what they do, or the county treasurer, or you know, so it truly is kind of an anarch thing.
And that's Wisconsin statute.
Right. Constitution driven in this case.
So this is interesting. So county government kind of started in 1960, authorized, they authorized.
It started in the territories.
Oh, okay. So what was this, in the beginning you said that, oh, never mind.
The administrating-
They were allowed to administrate.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it.
And thank you for, but thank you, that reminds me of one thing I wanted to tell you. The first three counties were Brown, Crawford, Michilimackinac, 1818, okay? Then there was, by 1901, there were 71 counties. 1961, they added Menominee to make the 72. So, you know,
So you're saying it's not-
Nicolay,
like Brown was a bigger county and
I don't know how big it was, but it was one of the earliest counties because of the explorers coming down
Right.
through Canada, the voyageurs and
Right.
Fort Howard.
Yeah.
And
The water
Crawford County, one of the other first, is over right next to the Mississippi River where the Wisconsin River goes into the Mississippi, which was another area of exploration. I'm guessing, and I don't know this, but it sounds like Michilimackinac is probably the UP that we
Yeah.
lost.
Oh, yeah.
And it would have been up there where
That
the
sounds like
explorers
it.
were coming. So, so we've had counties since the territories. And that was how the state decided it was going to, you know, carry out its stuff.
So on these county officials, the first line there is about, they're elected residents of the county for 4-year terms. Do these follow along the presidential years or are they staggered?
They're staggered.
Okay.
There are three, well, we've got 6 of them. I think there are 4. This fall, we're gonna have county clerk, I think, not the sheriff. It'll be in, I should show you in my purse in but you'll see it in here. There's a little county directory that will show you that. But what I wanted to point out about these elections are, in Wisconsin, the April elections are nonpartisan elections. That's when county board, towns and villages, school boards are elected. The November election is always a partisan election. And that's why these county officials are still in November with the state and federal things. Okay. All right, so there's the directory that I meant to get it out of my purse and show you. That, the first copy of that is free in the county clerk's office. You can buy additional ones. Right now it's $3 a piece. At some point it'll go up a little bit. But it is very valuable. It has all of the local governments, all of the officials, their phone numbers, their email, the town, village, city, county offices, it's got your parks. There's lots of good stuff in there.
It's on.
It is online, and I'm gonna, and I'm gonna show you that if you don't already know. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is you always want to verify, because everything is subject to change. Now, this one is technically outdated right now, because we just had an election, so there are new local people in those things. So the new one will be printed by July. You'll be able to pick it up. Okay, so the subunits of the supervisors. So the county board supervisors, they are in that April election, they are nonpartisan. At their organizational meeting, they elect their chair and their vice chair, and they reapprove any changes in their rules of orders and so on. They also have 2 kinds of subunits. Their primary subunits are primarily made up of county board people. So if you look at the list, there are 2 kinds. There are standing committees and there are statutory committees. Standing committees are pretty much just county board members, and these are the group that I'm talking about, these committees. The statutory committees are described, and their duties and their composition is in the statutes. So for example, administrative, totally decided by the county board, how many they want on it and who's on it. Health and Human Services, which has the asterisk, is a statutory committee. It does have 5 county board people, but it also has to have a hospital representative. There might be well, there are two of them. There's a nursing representative and a doctor representative. So there have to be representatives from the local health systems. There has to be somebody has some sort of environmental interest. And then there's another person that has to have some relationship to a client of Health and Human Services. So 4 of them are public members.
So you're saying that's all specified in chapter 59?
Yeah, I'm sure it is, because that's where almost everything is that has anything to do with the county. Land conservation is another statutory committee, and it's mostly county board, but there's one person that has to be a part of the farming community, and that's defined somehow. And actually, at the last county board meeting that I didn't get to listen to on Tuesday, they actually changed that a little bit, so I'm not sure quite how they changed it. They redefined how that agricultural community person is chosen. And then resource planning is all county board members, but it is a quasi judicial group, and it is defined by statute how they operate, because they make zoning decisions. They grant conditional use permits and a variety of, amendments to the text and to the zoning maps. Okay, let's keep going, and then I'm gonna hand this out. So, first, yeah, let me keep one. You got, on the,
Those are all the
no, I haven't shown you the tiny subunits yet. I just
Okay,
showed you
there
the
we
big, the primary subunits. Okay, so on this organizational chart, if you look at this one, the top are all of the units, okay? If they're in gold, and I apologize for the color. My thing was running out of juice.
You still can tell them
But you
apart.
can tell them apart. The
Mhm.
yellows up there and on here are those primary committees that I just told you about. All these others are other subunits, but they're smaller. They might only have one county board person, but they all obviously have a function in carrying out the duties of the county, in overseeing the duties of the county. Down below, you have all of the departments. The ones that are pink, and they do show up lightly on there, are the ones that are headed by the elected officials. And the other ones are headed by appointed or hired officials. Okay, then if you look on the back, this, there's some duplication here, but that takes the 21 supervisors. It gives you the primary subunits at the top and tells you what they oversee in terms of departments.
Did you create this, Sue?
No, and actually, thank you for asking me that, so I don't forget to tell you. This you will find in a document called the orientation packet. I'm going to show you how to find that later, but I'm going to pass it around. This is an old one. This is from when on 2018, and I have it simply because they gave it to us at that point. Right now it's online, but you will get a sense of all of the stuff. So- Orientation for supervisors. So these supervisors got elected in the April election. Then the first Tuesday of the month, and I'll talk about this more in detail in a minute, except that was the official legal organizational committee, organizational meeting of the new county board. And at it, they went over a packet that thick with all this kind of stuff in it, and these two things are in it. So because, I mean, most of them were on, but there were 4 new ones, and they all get to hear it again. And this is actually a really neat diagram that hasn't been in the packets before this year, so
Do
I
they
really
get-
liked it.
Do they get appointed to committees or do you get to?
Well,
asked to be on
what
the committee?
happens is whoever decides they think they want to go for county board chair starts lobbying their fellow county board people. And they usually talk to somebody that they think they might like to work with as county board vice chair. And sometimes that doesn't happen, but somebody says, I think I want to be vice chair. And they also lobby their fellow ones. And sometimes people will say, yeah, I'll vote for you. I'll be happy to have you. And sometimes they don't commit. But by the time they get there, the person who seems to be the leading candidate has an idea. In the meantime, the administrator has a questionnaire sent to all of the people running for county board. And they fill out what are their choices, first, second, third of what I'd like to be on.
Oh,
And then the person who pretty much knows that they're gonna be county board, sometimes it's an actual real competitive thing, but lots of times it's not. This last time it wasn't. Everybody knew it was gonna be David Engelbert. So what happens is that he works ahead with a sketched out kind of a possibility. And there certainly is some prestige to some of these more than others. Admin has got the most power. Everybody wants to be on admin. You don't usually get on it for a while. Some of these, nobody wants to be on. There are certain kinds of folks that don't want to be on Health and Human Services. There are other kinds of people that absolutely, that's their first choice. It just depends on what their interests are. So there's a kind of a sketched out thing. And then what happens in recent years, at least, is after that orientation piece, then they elect the chair and the vice chair, and then they take a break of about a half an hour. And a committee of committees takes the sketched out thing and goes in another room and tries to make sure that they're even and that people, how is it? Do you see any problems with what we've got? And again, and that's a seniority. You don't get to be on the committee of committees unless you've been on for a while and you get asked. It's a privilege to be on it. And then they flesh it out, and Lori Holtz, the administrator's assistant, quickly, prints them up and brings them down. They look them over. Most of them have a clue as to where they're going to land because they've either been told, well, I'm likely to put you on this, I'm whatever. I mean, there might be a few surprises, but mostly they kind of know where they're going to be, and then they approve them, and then they are an organized county board. Did I answer the question? I'm not quite sure how you worded it originally, but yeah, there's some negotiating that goes on because there are some county board people who want to be on everything, and there aren't enough committees to have everybody on everything. So whatever, but and in some of those cases, you can ask to be the chair, and the chair is appointed by the county board chair as well. In other cases, usually the statutory ones, it will say they have to be elected. So they are not appointed. The first meeting, they have to elect their chair. They all have different rules depending on how they got organized. Okay, so anyway, so that's, you see the subunits that are much smaller, and you will see on the right of each column CB members. So you'll see that some of them have one county board member, some two. But in the subunits, there are many other people with other positions and representing other organizations or members of the public and so on,
I
depending.
was on the CSD
Yep.
committee for years.
Yep.
As a principal.
Yep.
So there
Yep.
has to be someone from
From
local
the
school
schools.
district.
Yep. Okay.
I have a question on the Health and Human Services Board there, 9. Does that represent the 4 people, your nurse, your doctor, your patient rep, and 5 county board people? So it's the other.
No,
Oh.
5 county board people and 4 members of the public. So
Okay.
total of 9.
So where do the 5 county board? It's from. I might have missed that. I'm sorry.
Well, here, I'm gonna give you hot off the press, the new,
Oh, good.
lists.
Okay. good.
I again apologize. My
Oh,
my printer was not doing, my,
Just saying, we're gonna move. That's what we're gonna do.
yeah, well, that wasn't my printer. It was my ink cartridge that was squealing. So I don't know why. I don't think there's the keys with regard to color are not necessarily going to be right, but you will at least
Yeah,
see
that's all right.
who they are. So, okay, moving on. That was determined a week ago Tuesday.
Hot off the press.
Yeah. All right, so then, Again, here's another listing of the subunits, but you've got the handout with that. And there are lots of them, so here's the rest of the list. All right, so we're gonna look at where the departments are by building. You get a feel for the kinds of things. So, the balloons obviously are where these things are. So the constitutional offices are the ones that I talked about before. They will have an asterisk. And again, a reminder, they're the 4-year term people. We also have another elected official, two elected officials in the county, our judges. They get the 2 asterisks. And of course, we just elected a new one, Jennifer. And then, so your department heads are one of the 3 things. They're either constitutional offices, circuit court judges, or appointed department heads. And we're going to look at them building by building. This is the county government center. And again, you'll see the asterisk if that particular department is headed by an elected person. Those also are. It's interesting to see when you look at the department list, how many services. Most people know that county government plows their roads. And they don't know a lot of else of what they do, but I mean, we have a veteran service office. We have all kinds of different things that the, and that the state wants provided to its citizens, and this is how they get it done. Okay, then we have the Justice Center. And again, that's where our circuit court is. It's where our jail is. The clerk of circuit court, DA. It was built in the 80s, the late 80s, I think. If you read the Pulse recently, the new chair of the county board, David Engelbert, served 12 years in the 80s. And I don't remember, in it, there's an article about him because there was a recall. There was a lot of controversy about the building of this center because they thought it was too big, it was too expensive. They didn't like where it was being located. There was a lot of fighting. And so there was a recall, and a lot of supervisors got.
Said 20 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah,
Oh, more than 20 years ago, actually.
really. Boy,
Well-
time flies when you have fun.
Yeah. But anyway, David did not get recalled. And he's very proud of that. I'm not sure how that all worked, but he then served as the chair of what they called the building committee, which then supervised the building of this.
Mhm.
And then he went off for a while and then he came back on.
So how big is this jail?
125, I think it can take
Wow.
cells. They wanted to build it big enough. First of all, that they wouldn't outgrow it, but secondly, that they could board from other counties as a
As
source
needed.
of minimal revenue.
Yep.
And they do that.
Oh.
They get state sanctioned people from other prisons and a lot of Brown and especially Kewaunee County.
Yeah.
Especially because Kewaunee County's jail is really hurting and they don't seem to be able to figure out how to get it done.
So if you get jury duty, there is probably gonna be somebody who can go to jail there. I mean, it was just kind of curious to
Oh.
me.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's big
it's a
enough.
jail, and there are people
And
in
it's,
it.
yeah. Okay, so we have the Aging and Disabilities Resource Center. It's a community center if you haven't been in
I know,
there.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
And
it's
it was the
beautiful.
old highway shop before. I'm proud of this one because I was on when
Absolutely.
we did this.
It's
This was a,
Well done. It's beautiful. I love
So-
that fireplace.
Oh.
and it's
Yeah,
where the
real nice.
ADRC is, and the aging program, and at the other end of it, well, you'll see it later on. Okay, there's the Highway and Airport Department. That is just next to the Justice Center on Duluth Avenue. It's a different driveway, but. And obviously the Sturgeon Bay Library. Historical Museum, if you haven't been there, you really ought to go.
Yep.
Okay, how did I manage to miss emergency
There you go.
services? That's the other end of the ADRC.
That's good.
I went too fast. Okay, county calendar. All right, so, and these are your committee, general committee information. Again, you always gotta check
especially on the holiday.
Well, actually, here.
Interesting.
I'm gonna show you how to find the overall monthly calendar at the end. But this is more specific to each of your committees, again, with the caveat that they can change. But there's that column that also will tell you who you can ask for more information from. In general, packets, they have to be out 24 hours in advance, and they often are out the Thursday or Friday before the week that these committee meetings happen.
You say propose, 'cause they haven't voted on this yet. or-
Where does it say?
Committee meeting.
Oh, because, no, they didn't have to act on this. The clerk just put this together as informational. But it's proposed in the sense that they've decided that most months, the administrative committee meets on the third Tuesday. But that doesn't mean
Yeah,
that
it's not.
things can intervene and they might have to move it. Okay, so you look at the beginning of the month, and the first 2 weeks, you're gonna see the things like highway and facilities, health and human services, judiciary, public safety. And because that's the committees that are, they're kind of like content committees. They oversee departments that do different projects and need lots of approvals. You get to the third week of the month, and that's when admin and finance happen. Because all those things that those other committees are doing, like they want to hire a new person, they want to build a building, they want to buy a new vehicle, whatever it might be, it's got to go through admin and finance,
Right.
one or the other or both, in order to get it to happen. So the flow happens from the content through the kind of administrative pieces, operational pieces to get, because admin often decides, is it going to happen from the recommendation of that content committee? And then finance decides, if it's going to happen, this is how it's going to be financed. It's going to come out of undesignated fund balance, or it's going to be a bond or whatever it might be.
That happens.
And then the
before
fourth
board.
week is the county board that takes the final thing and makes the decisions. But that's why if you want to lobby on something, you can't wait to county board. You got to
Yeah.
get it at
Video,
JPS
yeah.
or Health and Human Services. You got to get it at the beginning. That's where you hear where the arguments are going to be.
Mhm.
And then you got to follow it at admin and finance, because those people can shut it down. And you,
They're
yeah,
powerful,
you just, they are, and that's their job
Right,
to vet it.
they should. be.
And so you have to make sure you've answered, you've done your lobbying if you need to, made your testimony, whatever. Because by the time it gets to county board floor, a lot of people have talked about it. They've kind of decided, they've heard the, it's pretty hard to change minds at that point unless they're not, specifically involved. Okay,
Before you get any further, no, all these committee assignments and myriad of county board people and citizens. Now, does the compensation, is it costly? Are they reimbursed for that committee assignment? Or
they
just the
are paid a
citizens?
salary.
Yeah, but the citizens are.
Citizens are paid, not a salary, but they get a per diem. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yes,
That's
yes,
what-
they are.
Notice that the location of most things meetings is listed as chambers.
Yes.
What is
There's the county board room in the county government center, and then there's a room with an expandable partition behind it called the chambers room. So it can be opened for a bigger access, or it can be kept as a separate. And years ago, before COVID, the highway committee would meet in the highway building, and then, everybody met in their satellite offices. Then COVID came, and all of a sudden we had to do things online. They were already setting money aside for better videotaping equipment so they could do it in-house and all of that. But there was a lot of federal money that came to allow that, and it allowed them to do a much better job with what they bought, make it a bigger deal, so now they could tape and make virtual committee meetings, which they didn't before. And, but that meant then that all those committees had to come to that spot, because that's where they have the money to,
Where
I
the
mean, that's where they put
technology
the
is.
technology. Thank you. Okay, so county board meeting schedule, again, subject to change. this doesn't necessarily affect what you're watching, but the key meetings that are not always the fourth Tuesday are the organizational meeting that happens after the election in April. The budget meeting, which happens in November, because by statute, it has to be the Tuesday after the first Monday. It can be over 2 days, but if it's the second Tuesday is Veterans Day, then it's the next day. It's just one of those weird things. And the only other time, and you'll see this on here too, the only other time is the Wisconsin Counties Association has its convention in September. And so it's often at that same week, so then they bump it a little bit there to make it work. So they can go to that. And it's not impossible to have other changes, like if the weather was bad. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but it's
There's no
possible.
power.
There's no power, right? In December, sometimes they don't have a county board meeting if there isn't something specific. The time is normally 9, except during the months of January, February, March, because the ferry schedule. And Joel Gunlickson is on county board. He's the chair of the committee she watches, and he's a cat, so it starts at 10. And, okay, so keep moving here. All right, so I am not an expert on the budget, but I'm gonna say a couple things about it, and then there's certainly more information that you can find out. There is a budget document, which I did not print because it's huge, but I am gonna pass around the table of contents, so you can see all the stuff that's in it. It's got a wealth of information about the county and its financial stuff, and I don't know, an awful lot of stuff. Now, my point in putting those terms are, those are the pieces that go into the budget. So, and the schedule of the budget, which I'm going to go to here for a second, follows a process from the beginning of the year all the way through November when the budget is passed. And those pieces, the annual reports are the first thing that that is done. The administrator tells his department heads, complete your annual reports. They're due by like March, something like that. That starts the process. I'm going to pass 2 of them around just to show you, and I'm going to pass the table of contents so you can see. This is the district attorney's annual report. This is Soil and Water's annual report. You can get a whole document that has them all. They are a really, really good way to know what the heck's going on. You learn, I mean, if you like this kind of stuff, obviously I do. Not everyone does, believe me. But you will see their goals. You will see the statistics about what they accomplished and didn't accomplish. In Soil and Water, the amazing thing is they have a huge budget, but 2/3 of it is grants and revenue. There is very little of it that's tax levy. So, so it's interesting to watch. So the annual reports are something, if you're watching a county committee, at the very least, you ought to read the annual reports for the committees that you have oversight over.
So I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to
gonna
that. Yep. Then another piece, and throughout this calendar year, different pieces will come online and there'll be worksheets, and they'll have to hand them into finance, and they will then be put before all their committees. So one will be the capital improvement plan. That's something that it is supposed to last at least 10 years. Where do I have that definition? It should be something that's more than $50,000. Yeah, have a cost of over $50,000, have a service life of 5 years or more. It's generally non-recurring. I mean, you build the ADRC one time. It's not something that you have to do every 5 years kind of thing. Then there are the non-CIPs. Those are usually cost about $5,000. They might have a lifespan of 1 year, so they're the less, and they might be recurring. And then there's a technical one. ARPA is kind of recent. It stands for the American Rescue Plan Act. It was one of those
Oh,
first
yeah.
grants that came from the feds, and a lot of money came to local government. And they have until the end of 2024 to have designated it for a specific project, and the books have to be closed on it by the end of 2026. So I noticed, and this wasn't the case when I was on in the early years, but in this budget calendar, 2025's budget that will be passed this November, they have their ARPA worksheet. So whatever projects they've got money set aside, like there's a sober living facility that we're watching from Health and Human Services. There is ARPA money set aside in a reserve for that sober living facility when they can get the right building and the right organization to do it. And then, of course, payroll, requests for new personnel. And at every stage of this thing, I'll come back to levy cap. At every stage of it, it's prepared by department heads. It comes to the oversight committees. They discuss them, they debate them. There are meetings between, you know, the directors at the departments, with the administrator, with the finance director. There's a lot of public opportunity for scrutiny of the budget all the way along. There is a final November hearing, but by the time it gets there, it should have been chewed on all year long. So that if you're really caring and watching that ARPA money stays there and doesn't get spent on something else, you kind of got to do that all along. It's too late by the time you get to November. Okay. Trying to think if there's anything else. There's the table of contents. Again, all kinds of information on the whole county. It's more of the table of contents. Okay. So, and this is going to be very cursory. We have a budget, last year's budget is like $107 million. And there's a certain amount of revenue that comes in, and it comes in some from the federal government, some from the state government. Mostly when services are designated by law, we want this, you know, county or the state or the town or the city to do this. It comes with mandated money along with it. It should anyway. Unfortunately, as the years go on, less and less of that mandate remains, and now they're down to almost nothing. And so where does that come from? So grants, donations, user fees, whatever pass-through money you can get from the federal government and the state government. We do have a 0.05% sales tax, and that adjusts it a little bit, but it's not a very significant amount. I think it was like $400,000. And in a budget that's $107 million, that's not a whole lot.
You're saying the 0.05% Silicon sales tax? Wait.
Yeah.
Brought in 400,000.
No, it adjusted,
5.
yeah, it adjusted it by 400,000, right? Now, the other thing about that is the sales tax shouldn't be used for anything that's recurring, that's operational costs. It has to be kind of used for, I don't know, a one-time thing or some projects that you don't have, because you don't want to build in a structural deficit that you have it one year and then you don't have it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the revenue comes in. And again, here's the resolution that the county board has to pass based on the whole budget document. There's your $107 million expenses, less the revenue that came in. Then you get the county levy, 31,000. The equalized value comes in from the state, and through that you figure out your mill rate. I have to say, I had to relearn that every single year. And even now, I had to reread all this stuff, and I can't say that I necessarily remember it.
Complicated.
Okay, the website. So you go to the main thing, and the thing is, this moves kind of fast. It's going to go over again. But you can do this later. So you start on the top, you go all the way to the bottom, and that's where you're gonna find a monthly calendar. And you can print it. And it's usually available way, way at the end of the month, like the last day of the month. It's up there. It's very helpful to do that. Then you know when they intend to have your meetings. And sometimes there are joint meetings or special meetings for some reason. So it makes sense to do that, or at least look and see if your meeting looks like it's in the right place. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't check as it's coming up time to see if your meeting changed.
I like your little tutorial. there. That
Just
was
keeps going.
Well, I'll tell you, we've got a 40-year-old that's on our leadership team. She knows how to do this stuff. I barely know how to turn on the,
Give me
thing.
credit.
yeah, she's wonderful.
So bookmark, co.door.wi.gov
Yep.
on your
And you
taskbar.
can
and
find
should be
all of
fine.
the agendas.
That way you
Right.
don't have to remember anything, just click on that. and
Yep.
go, it's out.
Okay,
Didn't this website change a couple of years ago?
it did. They
Yeah.
got a new one.
Made me relearn everything.
Yeah, yeah. And frankly, it'll change again, you know,
Yeah, I
it's,
guess so.
but at least for a while, it'll be this way and they'll tweak it. And so that, I mean, I know that you guys are finding these, so you know, but it'll be here if you want to check in for anybody that's new. Okay, so when you get the agenda, and I'm gonna pass this around, this was the agenda packet for the committee this lady just went to and then wrote up a wonderful piece for our column. But to note that on this, there's obviously the stuff you originally went to it for, the place, time, and all of that. But this is your oversight committee responsibilities, okay, which departments you oversee. This is your Zoom and your telephone connections. And yeah. I tried to watch highway and highway and facilities on the day of the weather. And it got moved to the next day, but the link wouldn't work the next day anyway. I never got to see that one because I couldn't manage to get a new link in time. I should have tried sooner than sitting down and thinking, uh-oh. But anyway, so that's the packet and it'll give you an idea what's happening and very helpful. Okay, so here's another one, other reports. So you go to the agendas. If you go to county, there's a place for county board reports and miscellaneous. That's one place you will find the annual reports.
Oh.
It's a place you will find the budget
Mhm.
and you can see last year's
Capital
budget,
improvement
if
fund.
you want to see that. Yeah, your CIP plan.
Yep.
Parts of the budget are passed even at the county board level before they get put into the whole budget and eventually come up, like the CIP plan, because of the kind of money we're talking about for very big projects, has to be approved. I think it's in August before it can be put into the budget. So this gets you other reports. And then here's another place to find the annual reports. If you go up under the county one, it's in there.
Mhm. Department annual reports.
And then here's the official directory.
Yeah.
You want that? And that will get you a PDF.